Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of the Daily Night. I am your host, Brian Smith. And to be honest with you, today's show is probably going to surprise a little bit of you because not everybody appreciates offensive line play the way that I do. But to put it mildly, I'm a huge fan of how it works, all the dynamics behind it, and everything that's involved with running the football, passing the football, etc., and how it just maneuvers the entire field, even though everybody talks about running backs, receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends. I get it. I am enamored with them as well because they're the ones that score touchdowns. That's fine. But more importantly here, you cannot run the ball or pass the ball consistently and efficiently without offensive line play. Yesterday, I previewed one player on the offensive line. Today, another. You can find those at Inside the Night. Today, I did Matt Lee. And I'm going to do one every day this week because I believe in the offensive line being that important. It's going to be the first 5 players that I preview for this fall, if that puts it into perspective. With that being stated, here are a few things about me and why I believe that. When I go to a game, high school game to scout or whatever, if I'm going to a game and I'm not in a booth and I'm just scouting, I will go out of my way to be in the end zone at least as much as I can and go back and forth. If I'm in high school, I just walk around the field, get a little exercise there. So you can see vertically. And what I mean by that is you can see the line splits, you can see hand placement better, etc. Offensive line, while important, is also very technical and very difficult to grade. It's almost impossible at the high school level because the games are at night, the lighting's not great, but you really got to concentrate on games close to the goal line. And there's some truth in that with the games at the college level too, when they do one of those vertical shots right before teams, about to score, at least you think, 3-yard line in. Those plays, you can see not only the grit and the power of a young man that's on the offensive or defensive line, you can also see what they do technically. And when I previewed Lee today, just as an example, he's a very, very technical player. He plays center. He's about 300 pounds, give or take. And he's a guy that knows how to get the snap to the quarterback quickly. And more importantly, not overthink it. Technique is technique. There is no shortcut on technique with football in general, offensive line play as well. And mastering being a center, whether you're at shotgun, whether you're in the pistol, there are different distances, how far you got to shoot it back, or just a straight handoff under center to the quarterback. You have to do that first accurately every time, or else nothing else matters. That's first. Second, you're probably going to have a 300-pound guy that's not very friendly right in front of you, that knows that either your right or left hand is going to be occupied at least momentarily once the ball is snapped. You can move, but even that split second, it's a big advantage for the defensive lineman. So the reason I wanted to bring it up is the following. I've got some of UCF stats behind me. It's amazing to me what the statistics are like when UCF runs the ball well. They had 3 games last year. They were over 280. They had 4 at 255 or above, and they had 6 over 212 and above. When you hit those marks, it's going to be pretty hard to lose. And usually they're established early in the game, and then you just can, consistently move up. Historically, good running teams, college or pro, first quarter, you stick with it. You're averaging 2.5 to 3.5 yards a carry. Then it goes to about 3 to 4, then about 3.5 to 4.5. And in the fourth quarter, the floodgates come open. You might average 6 yards a carry, and the other team is gassed. It's an old hatchet that you just kind of swing and swing and swing, and the tree gets weaker and weaker, and it falls over. That's the defense. That's what you try to do. Lee, in this case, is an example. He helps make the line calls for the other players. And, depending on the front they see, there's a lot of schematical that goes into this. And I don't think, I'm not an expert on O-line by any means. I know very little, to be honest. But seeing how they would adjust, and you can see them doing signals, hit their thigh or something, and they're moving, they're talking to each other. When something goes well or it doesn't. Because once they shift, if they get thrown for a 3-yard loss, somebody screwed up. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So you don't know who did necessarily because somebody missed the call, but still, it just shows there's got to be communication. It's more than just big guys running into other big guys. O-line play is essentially 5 players trying to do one thing. 5 to create 1. Think about it that way. You want to create a wedge somewhere in the line or on the edge to give your running back a chance. And then when you pass, it's you're creating a half circle, if you will, if you can, and give the quarterback room to step up when he makes his throw. Those things sound incredibly easy until you see that 300-pound guy in front of you trying to push you right back into the quarterback's lap or into the running back's lap. Now, for this next season and the point of this podcast overall, when you average about 200 yards a game last year, you remember Bowser only played about half the games, healthy, etc., and they still averaged 200 yards, and they had a freshman start 10 games at quarterback. That means your expectation for the next season goes up, but not necessarily just with numbers. Here is the crux. Winning football against, not just good teams, quality teams, you have to be able to run and throw. UCF beating up on UConn, I don't know what the number was. If they wanted to, they could have ran for 400 yards in that game. We all know they were bad. What can you do against SMU? What can you do against Cincinnati? What can you do against Louisville? And although they were poor last year, there's no question. What can you do against Georgia Tech? That's still a Power 5 team. They probably got some transfers. I haven't even dove into the players that some of these other teams have. But what can you do against those teams, especially when it's a 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, those medium distances that are annoying? Do we run? Do we pass? Do we go for it if we don't get it? Do we just run and hope get close and then run again on 4? These decisions are oftentimes created by what a coaching staff believes or does not in their offensive line. And it also is a big indicative point about just confidence in your team. A lot of teams start with offensive line. And again, it doesn't matter if it's professional or college level. Watching UCF last year, there were only a couple of games where I didn't feel comfortable with what was going on. That they were getting out schemed or guys were just getting beat, whatever the reason was. And the two in particular were opposite ends of the spectrum, ironically, from my vantage point. Cincinnati, which was a great football team, had some NFL guys in their front 7. Very difficult to run just from that. And their secondary was so good, they just sucked everything in to the front 7 and added extra defenders out of the secondary because their corners were NFL players. The other was surprising, and that was Tulane. They just threw the kitchen sink at UCF, from what I remember, and tried different things because their run defense was, quite honestly, very bad coming into the game. But they held UCF to like 70 yards rushing or something like that. The biggest difference there is they adjusted. You have to be willing to prepare yourself for what you see on film, but then adjust. That's UCF's next challenge to me, in addition to, okay, you need to play well, run and pass against Louisville, against SMU, against Cincinnati, good football teams. That's easy. There's going to be a game or two like the Tulane game this next year where team is overmatched. And a guy like Lee, you have to find a way to get other guys involved with a scheme and play calls, even if it's just occasionally you bust one out. They're showing you something you did not expect. It's going to happen. Teams are just going to throw the kitchen sink at you if you're really good, and they're not going to do it in the game before or the game before that to see on film. How do you adjust? That's how I'm going to grade the key games, and then the one or two that's kind of like the Tulane game this past year. UCF has a 6th-year senior, Sam Jackson, who's probably going to start at guard. You've got 2 redshirt juniors in the middle, and then you have 2 tackles that are coming in that are senior, 5th-year senior. This is as experienced an offensive line as there is in college football. And I know it's not the SEC or the Big Ten or whatever, but all these guys in some capacity are going to go on to be in an NFL minicamp or go to NFL workouts, whatever. How high they get drafted, that's for a little later. I have some ideas on that. But if you really look at UCF's next season, it starts up front. You can't just make it up. I mean, every guy they start, who he's projected, there can be an injury, this fall will be in at least his 4th year of college football on the offensive line. How many teams are going to be able to say that? Maybe 20 out of 130? How many of them are going to have players that are good too? I mean, no offense, but some of the schools that have guys coming back, they're probably not that great. I will be surprised if at least 3 of the players that start this year for UCF's offensive line do not actually play in an NFL game. There's a difference from making a roster and walking out onto the field and putting that helmet on and going against another professional football player. Not everybody starts. I mean, it's still an honor to be on an NFL team. Don't get me wrong. I'll leave my opinions on which ones, but I have at least 3 that I think will, and there's a couple others that I'm curious about this year, etc. But the physical talent is there, the size, they're massive, and they have the experience, like I said. It starts with the run game, and the quarterbacks, I haven't even got into the past stuff with the O-line because we don't know who the quarterback's definitively going to be. I think it'll be John Rice Plumlee as the starter, but that's hard to say. We still got to go through fall camp for that, but they will be able to, in my opinion, to adjust because both quarterbacks are quite different, and that doesn't even count Thomas Castellanos, who I saw at UCF's camp. He was kind of hanging out. He's went from in the 180s to about 200 pounds. His arms are massive now. He's gotten bigger. They're going to have to find a way to get him on the field too. How well they adjust. Not many offensive lines would be able to do that. Not one quarterback, not 2, possibly 3 in some capacity. That doesn't even count the opportunity to run Wildcat with somebody else or, Isaiah Bowser or Ryan O'Keefe. This offensive line I trust to not only make the line calls through Lee, etc., but to adjust game to game, situation to situation, and put themselves in a good position to score. And that leads to my final point. If you control the line of scrimmage, the old adage is you keep your defense off the field. That doesn't change in 2022. UCF is pretty darn good in the secondary, and I think that the front, the edge defenders and the tackles and the nose guard, Mr. Lee Hunter, those guys are good football players. And they've got depth at every spot. They have multiple guys at both outside linebackers all across the front that are going to be really good. Linebacker has some talent. They've got a little depth issue, but they've got talent. But regardless of what spot it is, this is football. You're going to have guys get banged up, etc. The least amount of plays they have to be out on the field, especially in the heat of and humidity of Orlando, they need to be thankful to the offensive line, if I'm correct, because I think UCF's time of possession will be about 32 minutes to 33 minutes this year. And even if it's one possession a game, that they mitigate the time on the field for the defense, that's very valuable. So something to think about. Offensive line play does not get enough credit. It is very, very important. And it is also something that a lot of people, quite honestly, don't evaluate that much because they don't find it exciting. I do. So anyway, check it out at Inside the Nights. I got a couple articles up, and it's going to be all week about offensive line. And then I'm just going to move on through the roster, key players, some of the freshmen and stuff included. I want to wait a little bit on the freshmen until fall camp, get some reports back. But I'm going to go through the players that are returning first, then go into some of the recruits that are coming in afterwards. One a day, Monday through Friday. Might even throw in somebody on the weekend, depending on circumstance. So everybody have a great day. Thank you very much. Take care.